Right, okay, this is just a short video. It seems like everybody is doing it these days, and there's no problem at all in describing your witness experience for people who used to be Jehovah's Witnesses, or the ones who are still there as an affiliated Jehovah's Witness, but they're like the secret Santa. They're like some sort of spies. They're still in the organisation, and feel that they're doing this sort of undercover operation where, to all intents and purposes, they are Jehovah's Witnesses, but in fact they are sort of trying to undermine the organisation from inside, which, good luck to them. But anyway, I thought what I'd do is I wanted to explain just a little bit about my story, because these days, if you leave the Jehovah's Witnesses, there's so much more help. There's so much more help that you can get, and I refer to online help, where it's possible now, if you want to. There are groups that meet together, so they can assist each other. And there's so many more Facebook groups that will, that if you leave the Witnesses, that you don't all of a sudden feel completely bereft and alone. And there's so many things you can watch online now, which enable you the choice that you've made, or maybe you're at the stage now that you're a witness and you're thinking, you know what, this probably isn't the truth. And there's so much more help now that you can go online and you can see various people doing videos who will then completely, give you the agreement that what you're doing is the right thing. So there's the way you're feeling about things, that many other people have felt the same again. And it's so much more easier now, I think, now to leave the Witnesses, because there is that help there. There are people trying to support you, or email you, or either meet you or contact you. There's YouTube and Facebook and various different things that you can contact people. So you can leave the organisation. I'm not saying it's an easy leaving Jehovah's Witnesses, because I know it isn't. But you can leave Jehovah's Witnesses, but at least you don't feel as though you're on your own. Now, I left the Witnesses. I was with the Witnesses for about 28 years. I can't remember when we started going to meetings. What happened was I lived in a place called Ellesmere Port, which is on the Wirral, and my auntie and my uncle and my two cousins became Jehovah's Witnesses, and obviously came to our door. Well, they never came to our door. It's in Chapman the door. Obviously they came round and they must have witnessed to me more. And because of the particular lifestyle that my auntie had lived beforehand, she thought, what, you're coming to my door now and telling me that I'm not a Christian to be Christian. So, in other words, the message was rejected. But what happened was a Jehovah's Witness came to our door. Margie Woodhouse, I think her name was. She came to the door and she started a Bible study with my mother. And before you knew it, as always is the case, once your mum starts going to the meetings, you have to come along, because obviously we couldn't be left in the house on our own, me and my brother. And obviously what had been touted at the time was, of course, that Armageddon was very, very close. Now, I don't know about the year this was. This is maybe towards the end of the end of 73, coming into 74. I'm not too sure, but I know, absolutely know, that we were going to the meetings round about that time, purely because of what was talked about 1975 at the time. Now, for most young people today, so I'm nearly 55, and in 74 I would have been 12, right? At that time, in other words, if you're my age, if you're the next generation or 10 years younger than me, this will mean nothing to you. But 1975, despite what the Witnesses subsequently said after those events, 1975 was massive. They may try to gloss over it now like they gloss over everything else, but they tried to gloss over 75 as being a particular event of notable worth. Now, it was, and it really was, and it was talked about at from talks. It was talked about in the groups. It was talked about in the service. It was talked about with witnesses talking to each other. I can clearly remember witnesses saying, "That's the last car till Armageddon. That this is my last house till Armageddon, and even that's the last time I decorate that kitchen till Armageddon." This is how real 75 was. They may say now, no it wasn't, we never said it, but you did say it, because apparently, I don't know what book it was, because years later I went back to think, that 75 thing then, what was that all about? And I went back to a yearbook, and I think the yearbook, I've forgotten where the yearbook's gone because I've been away for so long now. But anyway, one of the yearbooks in it might have been 74, and either at the beginning at the end, it has notes, and I think the notes were written by the time by Franz, not obviously the one who turned apostate and left. That was by Freddie Franz, and I'm sure Freddie Franz wrote those. I'm sure he was the president at the time. And of course, the reason why we got to 75 is because of this. It's because, according to the witnesses, due to Bible chronology, that they figured out. It was all based on this thing about the created days. Don't know whether it's been so long since I've been away. You'll have to bear with me with this, because I know this thought got changed, and when this thought got changed, it had such an impact on me. That's when I started to think, this isn't the truth. The created days. Now, if you're a recent witness, or you've only been along for since the 80s, this won't mean much to you. The created days, but to me and thousands of other witnesses at the time, this meant a lot. The created days, that was in other words each day that in Genesis that God allegedly, each day he made something new, these guys in day 1, these guys in day 2, these guys in day 3, all those created days were supposed to be 7,000 years. 7,000 years, each created day. Okay, so it was figured out. It was figured out that Adam was born 6,000 years back from 1975. Don't know what the date was. You figure it out, take away 1975, then go back to the BC and whatever. You get to the day that it was found out, it was confirmed that Adam was not born, when he was created, when he was made. So that's why it was thought that Armageddon was coming to 75. It's based on the creative days. In other words, it was 6,000 years. They figured out Adam was made in, I think, October. Don't know how they figured that one out, but it was October. So Adam was made in October. So in other words, Armageddon was supposed to be between 1975 and October. And Franz actually said in the yearbook prior to that, he actually said, I think he put something like, it wouldn't have gone beyond witnesses noticing, because they'd stated in one book that's when he was made. And the reason why what's happened had been 6,000 years, because of course God rested after he made Adam. And what was supposed to happen is because Jesus would have to then spend 1,000 years cleansing the earth to then give it, this is the whole thing about Armageddon. Armageddon would come, then we'd have 1,000 years where Jesus would then cleanse the earth. So in other words, at the end of the 7,000 years that Jesus was able to go back to God and say, well, there you go, God, paradise, earth, everybody's back. There's been the resurrection of the righteous and the unrighteous. All the old guys from the Old Testament, they're back. The ones from the new one, of course, they've gone upstairs. But all the guys from the Old Testament, they're back. All the ones who survive Armageddon, they're still there. There's a paradise earth, and I think at this point, allegedly, I think this is where I think God decided in His wisdom to then give. Do the final test on the earth by letting loose Satan and his demons, who'd clearly been defeated on again for the second time, because God got defeated in heaven. So they got defeated on earth, and then they were held in the abyss or whatever it is. And they were then in other words, all the ones that had been resurrected back to the earth, who'd lived for 1,000 years. Apparently, at that point, again, for some bizarre reason, that God would allow us all to be tempted again. And this would be the final test, because after that final test, then that would be it. Satan would finally be destroyed, Thank God for that, because it has been going on for a long time. So it'd be finally destroyed, and he'd take down with him. It's still bizarrely he managed to take down witnesses, or people who'd been lived for 1,000 years. Thought, I think this Satan guy's got a point. Makes no sense at all. But anyway, that's that's what's going to. Maybe there'll be a lot of talking snakes. Don't really know. I don't know what the opportunity, what things Satan could offer. But anyway, this was what happened. So in other words, this is how we get to the creative days. So in other words, let's get back to 75. So 1975 was supposed to bring Armageddon, and I think at the time there was only maybe 2 million witnesses worldwide at that time. I might be wrong, because like I said, it's been a long time since I've been a witness, and my brain's going a bit. So that's why I thought I'd do this before I forget, what's going on. So the next thing is, of course, 1975 came and went. Yes, it went, and I do remember my mum saying, they think it's going to be October. You've got to be really good. So depending on whether I don't know, put the toilet seat down, or I was cheeky to my mum, or the teacher, or whatever it was, depending whether God would deem me worthy to go through to the paradise. And at the time, there was a publication. I've forgotten what this publication was, and it was sort of a pinkish one, and it might have been called Paradise, From Paradise Lost to Paradise Regained. If you've ever seen that book, I'm sure if you look it up online, there are some of the most scariest pictures in there. What it shows Armageddon, and it is horrific. If you're a young person at that time, and I was young, I was only like 11 or 12 or whatever it is, 10, 11, 12, and you're looking pictures, I think it showed like big cracks appearing in the earth, and guys guys were fighting, and then guys with hats, and I think it was like it showed a picture of a girl with a teddy falling into a crack in the earthquake. In other words, God wasn't, even if you were young and innocent, it didn't matter, because God was going to kill you at Armageddon. There was no compassion, no nothing. You were going down at Armageddon if you weren't a Jehovah's Witness. So, a really, really scary picture in this Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained book. It was truly horrific, and it had a big impact on me when I read it, because I just thought, wow, this is awful. So, of course, 75 came and went, and nothing happened. And there were some, at that time, stopped going to the meetings. They thought, well, the society got this wrong, it clearly isn't the truth, and they stopped going, and there were ones, and the congregation I was in, Ellesmere Port, I know there were ones that they called at the time, fell away, dropped off. Around about that time, they started to have a lot of apostasy talks, because Franz's nephew, the guy who wrote the book, Crisis of Conscience, Raymond Franz, that's a chap's name, Raymond Franz. He I think he was part of the governing body, and we had a whole host of talks round about that time. We got this word called apostasy. Never heard of it before. It wasn't this about us, because one of the governing members had decided to rebel or realise that things within the organisation weren't quite right. Of course, he was all wrong, they were all right. They managed to find a way to manoeuvre him to be disfellowshipped, and of course there was big warnings for everybody. And I suppose round about that time, it was either just after 75, there was a lot of talk about people then saying maybe the organisation isn't right. But we were young, I was only young at the time, and I think what the next. But then afterwards, it was all right. And the reason why it was all right is because all of a sudden, I think the following year in the yearbook, I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I've read this, in the following year in the yearbook, it was Franz again. I think he was still with us, and I think he put into it, we might have been over keen in suggesting 75. We might have been. Oh no, I think he blamed the witnesses. I think he says some witnesses, which is again what Jehovah's Witnesses do all the time. Then the organisation seem to blame us, well, not me anymore obviously, but your average Joe publisher who goes along to the meetings, blame them for being over enthusiastic, for conjuring this date themselves. No, we didn't conjure the dates. You provided us the date, and the justification come to that date. But this is typical Jehovah's Witnesses. They always seem to blame everybody else apart from themselves. So anyway, they said, I think the following year in the yearbook, you need to check this, I may be wrong with this one, they said that Adam wasn't the last creation. And oh my goodness, how could they forget? Of course, Adam wasn't last creation. It was Eve. Eve was the last creation. Now, you know, it's, it's early doors in the Bible. The animals, Adam starts feeling a bit lonely. You know, feeling a bit lonely here, God. I know you and me are having some absolute massive, great chats. But I'm seeing all these animals copulating here, and I'm seeing a lot of, you know, animal action. I'm not getting any. And surely this thing here in between my legs, surely this isn't just to go to the toilet. There must be something more to that. Or why am I getting these erections? What's that all about? What about all these wet dreams? So he must have been having this conversation with God. He used to walk in the garden every so often. I don't know how he did that one. But anyway, he did these conversations. Adam used to chat to him. And eventually, of course, Adam said to God, you know what? Oh, I'd like somebody like me. And of course, we know the rest is history, that Adam fell asleep, and we had the first procedure where he took a rib out, and from rib he made Eve. I don't know why, because I don't think he took the rib out of a male elephant to make a female elephant, you know, or a wing from... We can go on in here, you get the drift. I don't know why a rib had to be taken from Adam to make Eve, when God had allegedly made all these millions of other creatures without rib removal. In fact, a lot of creatures don't even have ribs, so figure that one out. So anyway, rib came out, and Eve got made, and the rest of knows history. So of course, Adam and Eve. So, you know, and that's early stages. You know, you only turn a few pages in the Bible, big book, early pages, Eve is the last creation. So why the governing body, why the spirit anointed ones who allegedly when they die immediately transfer to heaven to eventually rule in heaven, because of course heaven's a cleansed place now after God cunningly decided to throw Satan and his demons down to the earth. Good idea. What were you thinking? So anyway, what happened is that Eve, with this whole thing with Eve being last creation, we had then an unknown date, because nobody knew when Eve was made. So what the witnesses then said was, and this was talked about from the platform again, you know, talked about platform, or when we went out on the doors and, you know, conventions or whatever it is, they said that, and this was the phrase, and unless you're my age and older, you won't remember this, but the phrase was, we are living in the time that it took Adam to name the animals. Makes sense. Well, it made sense then. It made sense to a 13-year-old or 12-year-old, and obviously it made sense to adults at the time. They could see the logic in this. They could see the logic in that that Adam was made. We've got a fixed date for Adam being made. We can't do 6,000 years from there, because he wasn't last creation. Of course, you know, apparently God rested and saw that it was good. He made Eve. Made Eve, and then he saw it was good. I'm getting confused. So of course, we're living in the time that it took Adam to name all the animals. So we were living in this, you know, time. And of course, as every year went past, we were still referring us to living in the time that it took Adam to name the animals. So we're thinking, well, how many animals were there in the Garden of Eden at this time, you know? Surely there must have been animals all over the world. Surely round about wherever the Garden of Eden was, in Turkey, wherever it is, surely all the animals that we see today weren't there at the time. So what did he have to do? Did he have to go on his travels? You know, to try and name these animals. You know, did he spend so long on every animal where he was going, oh, big ears, a long trunk, little tail, very tall. I'll call it a elephant. That sounds good. You're an elephant. I'm going to call you an elephant. Now that took, what, 10 seconds on one animal. So why is it taking so long to do this process of naming the animals, as of course every subsequent month and year went past? Anyway, needless to say, that was, I'm not saying it was forgotten about, but this creative days was still in force. That never got changed. It was quite clearly written in many publications. All the witnesses, creative days. They were all there. without any doubt. And subsequently, I did what every other witness did at that time. I grew up, I finally got baptised, and I moved, still in the witnesses, still believing it's the truth. I did, like many of us did, stopped working full-time, did part-time work so I could then become a full-time pioneer. And eventually I moved from Ellesmere Port, I moved to Ayr, and then I eventually moved to Rutherglen in Glasgow, where it all went horribly wrong. In a lot of instances, I'll come back to that another day. I'll come back to that. I'll do another video on that one. I'll do, what went on in that congregation is unbelievable. But anyway, we'll skip that bit because we're just talking about why I stopped going. So we've moved on now. We've moved on now. I've subsequently, I'm in my 30s now, maybe. I can't remember how old I was. And I've got married. I've married my wife. I met in Rutherglen congregation. And the next thing is we had 2 books came out. They were called Insight. Big green books, which I've subsequently learned have apparently now been discontinued. They're called Insight. I'm sure they were called the 2 big green books. Don't know what they were called. I don't know called Insight in the scriptures. Like Volume A and Volume B, Volume 1 and Volume 2. And prior to that, we had the big blue book. We had the big blue called, I think, called the Aid to Bible Understanding. And the Aid to Bible Understanding still mentioned about creative days being 7,000 years old, long. Then this book came out, and I think it was the first book came up to about J, so CCC. One of the first things I checked was creative days. I need to check this. And when I read that creative days, I just thought, all of a sudden that point had gone. The time of the creative days being 7,000 years had gone, and I think it was high. And the bizarre thing was, I've got a feeling that in one of the daily texts, around about that time, they had mentioned the 7,000 years. 7,000 years, still there, still a good one. We're still believing that we're living in the time that it took Adam to name the animals. Long legs, long neck, short tail, giraffe. So we're still leaving that time that Adam was naming animals. And of course, many years had gone on. I think we're in the, probably in the 80s now or something. So many years had gone past. I think, and this is around about 86 or 88. I can't remember. And what happened is the book came out. These, the 2 green books came out, and I looked at Creative Days, and all of a sudden the 7,000 years was gone. They changed that to thousands of years. And I thought to myself, and I couldn't believe it, because to me, at that time, this Creative Days was absolutely massive. It was just as big as the generation that saw 1914 will by no means pass away. It was, to me, as big as that. Because people go on about the generation, that changed. Well, sorry, the biggest bombshell to me when I was growing up was the change of the Creative Days. The Creative Days change, which wasn't really, they never even announced it. They just sort of slipped it in. They slipped in this, thinking that either nobody would notice, but I did notice. I noticed this, and it massively bothered me. And I went up to elders and said, look, they've changed this. And they says, no, maybe they still think it's 7,000 years, Creative Days, because they've been along with me as long as I was, and they knew this. And I went up to elders and go, look, they've changed this. They now use the phrase thousands of years instead of 7,000 years, which meant this whole thing of 1975 to 6,000 years or 1,000 years of the practice gives. In other words, it was all of a sudden not a fixed time. It was open-ended. In other words, that whole, I call it a doctrine, had changed, and nobody even noticed. There was no study article in the Watchtower of how the Creative Days had changed. There was nothing. They just slipped it into this book, and it really stumbled me. And at that point I thought, wow, what is going on? And so I spoke to an elder in Rutherglen, and he said, why don't you write to the society and ask them for advice? And I did. I wrote to the society because it bothered me that much. So I wrote to the Bethel in Mill Hill, in Twickenham or Wembley or wherever it was, Dear Brothers. And I basically put the same thing. And I just put into it, basically it says, can we still say that we are living in the time that it took Adam to name the animals, and can we still say that the created days are 7,000 years long? Can we still say that? And the letter I got back was the biggest piece of spin you've ever seen, and it really, really stumbled me, because I got a letter back, official letter back from the society, and the sad thing is, I gave that letter to a guy called Mike Howarth, who bizarrely is still a witness in Rutherglen. How does that one work? And he looked at it, because that letter I got back from the witnesses, and I wish I still had it, that letter I got back from this, it totally... It was like what we understand. It was trying to, when you see people on the TV asking a politician, is that a yes or a no? And they will not ever commit themselves. And the reporter says, look, in relation to this particular subject, is it a yes or a no? And they went, well, what we mean is, and the next thing is, you know, you had, I think Theresa May, not so long ago, was on the TV. She was asked several times, you know, is this a yes, is it yes? And they wouldn't say, we just want yes or no, they won't do it. And this is what it felt like. We're used to not trusting politicians. You know, you say that you don't trust anything that comes out of politicians' mouth. In a lot of instances, that is absolutely true, because they've been found out to be liars so many times. But I was expecting something a lot better from this letter I got from the Bethel. And in other words, I don't have the letter anymore, and all it said was, it totally fudged the question. It just went in and it dismissed it. I never answered my question. It never gave an explanation of had the creative years changed. It never gave anything. It just says, well, what we and all it was, all the letter was still putting our faith in Jehovah and trusting in his organisation. In other words, it was saying, basically, it was trying to say was, we must just trust in the organisation and the way that Jehovah guides it. In other words, we're not going to answer your question. We're not going to answer your question, because you and I realise there's been a fundamental change in the society's teaching, and we hope nobody's noticed it, and we're not going to make a big thing of it, and that's what happened. And from that point onwards, I started to then really struggle with what I then started to read, and I at that point, it was the first time I ever had my doubts, because I just thought to myself at that point, you know what, there's something not right here. There's something not right here. So this was, I don't know when this came out, it was maybe 88, 86, but you can find out there's a change. And I, you know, literally at that point, I started to expect anything. And the next thing, but I still, you know, where'd you go? Where'd you go? You're a witness. You brought up witness. Your family are witnesses. I've moved up to Rutherglen congregation in Scotland. Everybody I know is a witness. I wasn't brought up in, like, I don't know, in the area, and I've still got a lot of schoolmates called Tam and Jimmy and this sort of thing. I didn't have any friends. Everybody I knew was a Jehovah's Witness. Everybody, because as you know, Jehovah's Witnesses, you're discouraged for having associations or friendships with people who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses. So, you know, what would you do? So I decided to do as many witnesses have done and still do, to just stay as being witness, because where else would you go? And you'd lose association with everybody. So the next thing that happened was we had this book, which again has subsequently been shelved by the witnesses, called Revelation Grand Climax. And I read that book, and we must have read that, I kid you not, and I don't know when this book came out. It was again probably late 80s, maybe early 90s. And this book came out, and we must have done it 2 or 3 times. And I remember reading this, and there were just stuff in that book when we read it, and I couldn't, with any conviction at all, put my hand up in the group and answer some of the questions, because to me a lot of the things in that book were ridiculous. Like we were looking at scriptures in the book of Revelation and attributing the fulfillment of that prophecy in either a tract being released or distributed, or a convention occurring by Jehovah's Witnesses, or a proclamation made at convention. And I thought to myself, so what you're telling me here is that when John had this vision, whenever it was, over 2,000 years ago, when he had this vision and wrote down this particular line, he was referring to an announcement made at Cedar Point, Ohio Convention, or whatever it was. And I thought, my goodness, I thought at the time, you know what, I think you have taken an absolute liberty here with the book that I still believe genuinely in my heart was still the truth. And I just thought, my goodness, you've taken an absolute liberty here by referencing, the things that happen in the witnesses and saying that in Revelation is a direct fulfillment of that. And early in the book, of course, you have the bit where there's a guy saying Jehovah's Witnesses are not inspired by God. But at the end of the day you're thinking, oh, hold on a second, this doesn't make any sense, because surely the Spirit-anointed ones, the governing body, the Spirit-anointed ones, or the writing committee, when they die, they're going to heaven. And when they go to heaven, they'll meet John and all the rest of the Christian Greek scriptures. They'll meet them, because they're all going to go to heaven. They're all part of these Spirit-anointed ones. So surely the same Spirit of God that inspired the Spirit-anointed ones in the first century to write, the Gospels and all the letters, and Revelation especially, surely when it came to the fulfillment of the scriptures in there, all the prophecies, that his same Spirit, the same Spirit that had managed to make an elephant and a giraffe, that same power would enable, when the guy sat down and then decided, we're going to do a book about Revelation, that his Spirit, or whatever it is, when it came to thoughtfully meditating on the fulfillment of prophecy, would ensure that the fulfillment given was correct. It's the same Spirit, same Holy Spirit, that inspired John to write the Revelation. 2,000 years later, the same Spirit-anointed people will go up to heaven. They'd make sure that the most important time, it wasn't important when it was written 2,000 years ago. The most important time was that the people, that prophecy was when the time was getting fulfilled, that they understood that. So it had to be absolutely spot on right. Like John never had to do different rewrites. I'm sure John didn't have to do rewrites of Revelation when he woke up from his dream the next day. And next thing is, a voice would say, John, you never dreamt that, you're making it up. John, did you forget about that bit? So I did. There was nothing there. I'm sure whatever John wrote down at the time was, well, if we can only let's just at this point believe what we believe. I'm sure John wrote down the next day exactly how he remembered that dream. He didn't have to do rewrites. So why would God's Spirit, 2,000 years later, when it came to an understanding and fulfillment of Revelation, why wouldn't his same strong Spirit ensure that the first interpretation of those prophecies would be the correct ones? So anyway, we started to do this in Revelation, and at the time I just thought, nah, there's something wrong here. And subsequently we had the red book. I can't remember what it was. I remember it got released in 84, 85. Big red book. It was the book that replaced the Truth book. Remember the Truth book, little blue book, the Truth book, little Truth book. Next one, the big red book, little lovely pictures. And we had that book. And I remember we were doing a study. I remember studying with somebody, and it was referring to a bit of the. It was mentioned in the book about the birds of the trees, and the birds that lived in the trees, and the fulfillment of who they were, whether wicked birds or bad birds, and what the spiritual thing, what the interpretation was. And then all of a sudden they said, oh, by the way, we've got this bit wrong. And I just thought, are we getting Are we getting a rewrite in this one? We weren't. So it meant, embarrassingly, I remember when I was doing a Bible study with somebody on Sunday, and we got to this bit, and I'm trying to think, how would I think if I was in his shoes? So we're studying this book that he's going to allegedly, change his life and become a Jehovah's Witness. And we get to this particular chapter when we ask this question, that the answer given in the paragraph is the wrong answer, because the witnesses have subsequently said, you know what, we've now thought about this, and the new truth is that we've got this one wrong. And so I then had to explain to this guy during this Bible study that what was being taught in this book, the thought, there was a new thought. A new thought, a new truth, and that just showed, and this was good. This shows that somehow Jehovah was with this organisation because they kept on changing the thoughts. And this wasn't the first time it happened, because way back in the 70s, and it was in Ellesmere Port, we were doing this book, a yellow book, it might be called the Theocracy book. And I remember we were in the group, and we were in the Harvey's house in Tennyson Road, Tennyson Drive, where I used to live, and we were in there, and the guy reading it was the eldest son called David Harvey. He was reading the Theocratic book, or whatever it was, it's a yellow book, and we're all following along, as you do, because we all follow along the paragraph, and then the elder then asked the question, and we all put up our hands and sort of give word for word, or try to give our own answers, and whatever it was. And he was reading this book, and all of a sudden we're following along, and he starts saying something completely different. And next thing, everybody starts looking up as he's got his head down and he's reading away, blah 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 blah, and he's reading this book, and we're all looking at each other thinking, what's happened? Has he gone mad? And then eventually the elder, his dad, said, David, what's going on here? Why are you reading this? And what happened was he was reading an older version of the book. And subsequently, when it came time to studying the book, the society had re-released it and changed the thought, but didn't tell anyone. So of course, poor old David still had his father's old copy. His father has a new copy of this. He's reading it. And his mum said, I thought you'd gone mad. She seriously thought that maybe it'd been taken over by the demons to say apostate stuff, because he was actually, well, funny enough, he probably was, because the society changed that thought. But at the time we just thought, oh, whatever, it's Jehovah's Spirit. So anyway, let's come back to the Revelation book. So anyway, the Revelation book, I started to read that, and at that time I started having significant doubts that what the society was publishing, what we were asked to believe, was right. But still, again, I'm a Jehovah's Witness. I was a servant. I still auxiliary pioneered. I did responsibilities in the congregation. All my friends were witnesses. Blah. You know the story. You know the story. You've been there, done that, seen it. Now, the final thing which eventually made me decide I have to leave, and I did take a bit of time to do this, is I was on the work, that's chapping the doors, in case you don't know what the work means, and we were meeting the Saturday morning, and we were there, and I was with a guy called Paul Bland, and he was a servant at the time, he's an elder now I believe, and his dad did the group, and we were out chapping doors. And joining us that morning was a guy called Gus Kelly, who, funny enough, I brought into the truth as my only person that I'd actually successfully chapped on the doors, come to the meetings, and got baptised and got married. Subsequently, he's been disfellowshipped for various reasons. Needless to say, so next thing, and he married a girl called Naomi Saunders, who was the daughter of Keith Saunders, who was one of the regular speakers at the district convention. So, good spiritual pedigree. He'd married into quite a spiritual family, apart from the son Jonathan, who subsequently turned out to be gay. Nothing wrong with that, but if you're Jehovah's Witness and gay, there is something wrong with that. And well, if you Google Jonathan Saunders, you find out that he went on to have a very successful and still successful career in in the world of clothing or whatever it is, and he's done very, very well for himself. It's just a shame that his parents can't share in his success, and I don't think they even meet with him because, of course, they're witnesses and he's a disfellowship witness. But anyway, that's a whole new story, the whole shunning thing. Nah. Anyway, so let's go back to, so Saturday morning, we're meeting there, and then Gus comes up to us and he says, "Have you heard the rumour?" And I went, "What's that?" He says, "The generation's been changed, the generation thoughts." And me and Paul looked at each other and we burst out laughing. We literally burst out laughing, because the thought at that time, and unless you were around at this time, unless you were a Jehovah's Witness at this time, the thought of the generation teaching being changed, you couldn't imagine it. It's like the Pope all of a sudden saying, "I'm getting married," or "I'm gay," just something like that. The thought of the generation thought changing, you wouldn't, in your worst nightmares of being a witness, that couldn't happen. It couldn't happen because it was a fundamental teaching of Jehovah's Witnesses. 1914, the generation, no means by pass away, watchtowers, 1914, millions now living, whatever. And the whole thing, in the front of the wake said it. Front of the Wake, which wasn't the big spiritual magazine, which of course what it was, the Awake actually says proclaiming inside cover, proclaiming Jehovah's Kingdom, since 1914, the generation there, it was there. And of course, when we went to people's doors and when we moaned about how bad the world was, yes, the world's a terrible place, it's a horrible place, you think it's good, don't you? No, it's actually a crap place. The world is a completely crap place, and I'm just going to go through blah 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 blah, and of course you go, "Oh, you're right, the world is a crap place," and then say, but what's God going to do about it? He's going to bring the paradise. And of course the big question to them was, but when's he going to bring the paradise? So we used to say, good question. Let me just take you here to Matthew. And then you'd read through, nation, kingdom, food shortage, blah, blah. And you say, these things have all occurred since 1914. And notice that it says there, this generation will by no means pass away. I said, so in other words, Armageddon, the paradise, the end of this wicked system of things is definitely, no doubt about it, is going to happen. Before your granddad dies. Your granddad's dead. Okay, your grandmother. It will definitely happen. It was a fundamental truth. It was a fundamental fact. It was absolutely integral to being a Jehovah's Witness, because we believe that. I believe that so sincerely, which empowered me to go to people's doors, because at that time we were trying to then think, right, hold on, where do we go from this? And we were looking at maybe other things, like, hold on, we thought that the Armageddon may come in 84 because of the 70 years, because 70 years appears with witnesses in the Bible a few times. 70 years this, 70 years that, 70 years that. So we thought, hold on, 70 from 1914, what does that make it? 1984, we thought it might come in 1984, then we thought, hold on, but World War I ended in 1918, so 1988, and this is the thinking time, this is how we thought about it at the time, witnesses. So anyway, Gus comes along and says, oh, by the way, have you heard the changing, they thought the generation? And me and Paul looked at each other and we laughed out heartedly of the ridiculous notion that the society could do that. We all know what happened next. All of a sudden, sneakily, as similar to the creation days, all of a sudden the next, all of a sudden it changed in the front of the Awake. That had gone, that whole generation thought, when you turn the Awake, it'd gone. Completely and utterly gone. And I kid you not, when I read that, I just thought, no. And literally, part of me died that day. And this is no joke about it, you can say I'm exaggerating when you lose your faith, when you lose faith in whatever it is, in something or anything or whatever, it is. And especially being with me so long, to lose that, it was awful, it was horrible, and I did that. I from that moment on, at that moment I'd lost my faith. I still continue to go to meetings. Next thing is we had the big watchtower, and I remember we were doing the watchtower study article on generations, I was just shaking my head. And then I still, there was then in the position that when I went to people's doors and people would say to me, oh, by the way, when's God going to bring these things? I'd have to say to them, I don't know. And to me, I couldn't live with myself anymore. And then when I used to have to then answer at groups, I came off being a servant. I didn't want to do that anymore. When it came off to answering the group, I put up my hand, and then I'd have to say, every answer I gave started with this. The society now says, in other words, this is what they're now saying now. In other words, not me saying it, this is what they're saying it is, and potentially this has just changed or will change. And that's everything I did. And I just thought, I was completely lost, because all of a sudden this society that I put my faith in, that this was the truth, all of a sudden started unravelling in front of me. And loads of people dismiss this. Loads of people were either so new into being the witnesses, it was no big thing. But to me, to go through 1975, to see the Creation Days thought change, and then now to see this change, it was demoralising. And subsequently I just started to fade away, and I went up to, we moved to the Calderglen congregation in East Kilbride. And what kept me in Rutherglen, what kept me in the Witnesses, was this association I had, because there was a good group of young ones, and we all got on really well, and we did a load of things together, because who else can you do things with? We did all the parties, and we still did functions, and went out and cinema and meals, and did that. But I was only there at that point for the association. And I went up to Rutherglen, from Rutherglen to Calderglen congregation, and it didn't have the same association. That the youngsters there were, well, I don't know, it wasn't the same. And then I started going to meetings on a Sunday, Tuesday and Thursday, and I used to think to myself, and they didn't have the dynamic speakers that Rutherglen had, and I used to think to myself, why am I here? Why on a Sunday, when I want to watch my favourite football team playing, or even go to the game, why am I here? Listening to guys speak who weren't very good at being public speakers, saying things that potentially a thought that could change 6 months and a year's time. So I had no confidence from that point onwards that what we were being taught was the truth, and nothing to base my devotion to it anymore. And I started to tell elders and servants, saying, look, I'm losing my faith here, bad, really bad. And they were going, you've got to trust in Jehovah. I'm going, how can I trust that Jehovah's even using this organisation when it keeps on changing the thoughts? Surely this doesn't, can't you understand what's going on here? And they couldn't see what I felt, and it seems I was the only one. And I we were there, and I had my son in 1999. I had my son. And I was watching the TV once, and there was the Omaha bombing, which was a particularly awful bombing by the real IRA, and it was, it was awful. It was a shopping street. They put a bomb. Somebody rung up the police and said to the police, "There's a bomb in the town." And they and the police, don't know what happened, who was to blame, but the police ushered people towards the bomb. The bomb went off, and it was utter carnage. And I remember seeing a before and after picture, and the both before pictures showed like people walking down, and that there was a baby. And my son was only young at the time; he was, less than a year or whatever it was. And as we were walking down, I saw a pram there, people walking down, and the next picture I think showed the pram at the side. I think a child had died. I don't think it was this particular one. And I thought to myself, I got really angry at this point. I thought to myself, all of a sudden, the witness thing which I believed in, all of a sudden Armageddon wasn't really coming, and then I got angry with God, and I just said, hold on a second, God, how many more people have to die before you decide to do something, before you decide enough is enough? There's been enough carnage, there's been enough massacres, there's been enough wars and injuries and terrorist atrocities. I'm going to do something about it. How many more have to die before you step in? And then I got angry at God. I got angry at God by making this organisation print the wrong things, even though I shouldn't. It really was them to blame. But obviously it's God's fault. I'm confused about that one. Whose fault is it? Is it God's fault for not, making sure they're doing it? Or is it them? Are they picking? I don't know, I'm confused that one. That's another story. So I got really angry with God at this time. And then I started saying to people, I started having sort of, affecting me that way. I started saying to people, look, if God, this is bizarre, this is what I actually came out with. I was actually saying to the Bible, if God needs one more sacrifice, let it be me. Why doesn't he just destroy me and then say, right, that's the last one I'm doing. Now I'm going to step in. I just thought, in other words, it was bizarre. It was like sort of a Jesus complex. All of a sudden I just thought to myself, let me be the second sacrifice that you can take and then you can get on with it. And that's the road I went down. Because in my head I was trying to figure out this thing, figuring out what's happening to the witnesses, why they were doing things wrong, why all of a sudden Armageddon wasn't going to be coming quickly, so there were going to be more atrocities like Omaha. And subsequently, since that time, there's been loads. 9/11, there's just one of them. There's been loads of things happened. So at that point I just thought, you know what, I'm not going to the meetings anymore. And I came to the end of whatever year that was, and I just thought, you know what, this following year I'm no longer going to go to the meetings, because I struggle to believe in a loving God, and I don't believe in this organisation anymore. And I told my friends, I was like moving away anyway, and I just said to them, I'm not going to go to meetings anymore. I can't, in all faith, my own personal integrity stops me from going to the meetings, because the truth, I hate to keep using that word. Why do we use the truth when it isn't the truth? Because the witness teachings were no longer in my heart, and I no longer had any love for the God of love, because of the fact that he hadn't done anything yet, So that was it. So we moved from the East Kilbride area to Hamilton, and there we sort of got lost, because when we moved to Hamilton we were allegedly in the new congregations area, and I never ever had a witness from Hamilton. I was there for about a year and a half maybe, never ever come to the door. I never had an elder's visit from either the congregation in Hamilton, because I never said, oh hello, I've just moved into the area. The witnesses in Calderwood never notified the elders of the area I'd moved in. You better go and save this brother. He's nearly spiritually dead. He's drowning. And that's it. And I left. And I left because of that reason. I left because in my own mind, without reading any, because at that time there were no anti-witness publications. I think there was a book in the Bible called 30 Years a Watchtower Slave. That was the only one I knew. And of course Raymond Francis' book, which I'd seen at conventions by apostates trying to flog this book, Raymond Francis, Crisis of Conscience, which of course, woof, you're not going to go anywhere near that. So I stopped going to the witnesses. I stopped going. And I was bereft, completely and utterly bereft, because all of a sudden my association with everybody I knew stopped. I had no friends at all, because they were all witnesses. The only people the only people I talked to then, luckily I wasn't self-employed. I actually I had a job in Glasgow, so I talked to these people about football and movies and whatever it is. But as soon as I came home, that was it. We didn't see anyone. We never saw. All of a sudden, I used to play football 2 or 3 times a week. You can't do that anymore because you're not a witness. I never got disfellowshipped because I never then left to go out smoking or shagging or drinking or whatever else. I just left because I didn't believe it was the truth. And that's what happened. It just fell away. I never went down the road of disassociating myself. I no longer wanted to be known as a Jehovah's. I just left, and I was left on my own. And I then went through a stage of depression, because all of a sudden I had nothing. I'd lost my faith, the faith that I'd had, and I was absolutely committed to and believed for 28 years. I'd lost my faith, and then by losing the faith, I'd lost all my friends. We went down to see a couple of our friends, and just to see them, here's Benjamin, here's my son, yes, we all know I'm not going to meetings anymore. And literally I said to them, you need to come to my house next, you need to come see my new house in Hamilton, it's lovely, it's got a wee conservatory, that's really nice. We're all busy now. And that was it. All of a sudden, all my witness chums were all very busy. They couldn't come and see me because, of course, I had rejected the faith. And by rejecting the faith, I'd, in other words, rejected our friendship. hold on, I've known you for like, you know, over 10 years. We've done everything together. We've, you know, been close buddies, we've gone away trips here, played football, meals, pubs, whatever, and all of a sudden, didn't want to know me. All of a sudden every Sunday was busy. And that's what happened. And subsequently, I went through a stage of being really depressed for a long time, but luckily I was able to come out of it. And what finally made sense is many years later, I bought through Amazon, because back then the internet, when I left, there wasn't any internet or anything. This is 2000, maybe it's the early stage of the internet. So there wasn't any YouTube or Facebook or going online, you know, it was just, there was none of that at all. So I had no one I could go to help. And I bought through, I think, Amazon, when Amazon just started. Later on I bought Crisis of Conscience. I thought, I need to read this. I need something to, because you can't talk to anyone, because you couldn't talk to a witness, and because ex-witnesses don't understand, you can't talk to anyone, because there was no Facebook or YouTube to have chats with people online. Oh yeah, I can understand, I've been there, blah blah blah. I had no one to talk to, nobody at all. I bought Franz's book, and when I read it, it completely justified my decision, because all of a sudden everything made sense. The way that Bible doctrine was formed by literally one bloke on his own doing it. And mostly it was done by Freddie Franz, this guy's uncle. All of a sudden, everything made, you know, the power struggles, the power grabs, you know, the things that were going on, all of a sudden it made sense. That's all of a sudden I realised where we get these teachings from, why things have changed, because literally it's different men who are making different decisions. It's nothing to do with spirit anointed, it's got nothing to do with inspiration. In other words, to me it was a completely godless society, which made sense of why it's completely and utterly gone wrong. And of course this is before the days of what's happened since with the witnesses, with what's come out since with witnesses, and that they're trying to shield, you know, things that happen with children. This is way before that time, So I just thought I'd share that with you. I am going to put up other videos in dealing with certain, now I'm able to talk about these things. I'm going to put up other videos in relation to, you know, people, you know, the different things that we believed at the time, and also, most importantly, which is a big thing, was my what happened with me and music and certain Jehovah's Witnesses, because that is a story on its own. But anyway, I'll leave that with you, and see you again. Any views, any comments, well, you know what to do. Anyway, have a nice day. Bye bye.